See? Okay, go ahead and give me an answer. All right, there are a few slides that I have to read for Title VI, and I'm just going to go ahead and do that as soon as Tam has them. Okay. So our non-discrimination policy statement. The California Department of Transportation, under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, ensures no person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Caltrans will make every effort to ensure non-discrimination in all of its services, programs, and activities, whether they are federally funded or not, and that services and benefits are fairly distributed to all people regardless of race, color, national origin, or national origin. In addition, Caltrans will facilitate meaningful participation in the transportation planning process in a non-discriminatory manner. Related to federal statutes, remedies, and state law, further those protections to include sex, disability, religion, sexual orientation, and age. For additional information or guidance on how to file a complaint or obtain more information regarding Title VI, please contact the Title VI branch manager at 916-324-8379 or visit the following webpage, dot.ca.gov/programs/civil rights/Title VI. And now we have a Spanish translation. Yes.
Thank you. Now I will read the Spanish translation for those that are participating and speak Spanish. Declaración de la norma de no discriminación. El Departamento de Transporte de California, el título 6 de la Ley de Derechos Civiles de 1964, asegura que ninguna persona en los Estados Unidos, debido a su raza, color, origen nacional, será excluida de participar ni se le negarán los beneficios o será objeto de discriminación en ningún programa o actividad que reciba ayuda financiera federal. Caltrans hará todos los esfuerzos para asegurar que no exista discriminación en ninguno de sus servicios, programas y actividades, ya sea que reciban fondos del gobierno federal o no, y que los servicios y beneficios sean justamente distribuidos a todas las personas sin importar su raza, color o origen nacional. Adicionalmente, Caltrans facilitará la participación significativa en el proceso de planeación de los programas de transporte de manera no discriminatoria. Los estatutos federales relacionados a los remedios y a la ley estatal refuerzan esas protecciones para incluir el sexo, la discapacidad, la religión, la orientación sexual y la edad. Para información y orientación sobre cómo presentar una queja o para obtener más información relacionada con el título 6, por favor comuníquese con el gerente del título 6 y el teléfono que está en la pantalla.
Thank you, Jessica. All right. Now for our meeting protocol for online attendees. For written questions or comments, please type them in the chat box by pressing this icon at the bottom of your screen, the little verbal one. For verbal comments, please hold them until the Q&A session after the presentation. Then please use the raise your hand icon to be unmuted. Verbal comments have a 2-minute limit tonight. We'll try to get as many comments as possible within our meeting. For closed caption, press the closed caption icon and choose your language. A court reporter is present to record all public comments. Thanks, Sam. Please be respectful of other community members' concerns and input. And that's for the online protocol. All right, is it on? Test. Okay, here we go. Okay, for the in-person attendees, very similar. Please hold comments and questions until the end of the presentation. Please approach the microphone at the front of the room. We'll put this back there for you. When you speak, Each speaker will have a 2-minute limit to share their comments, same as online. Please state and spell your name and identify the organization you're affiliated with, if you're affiliated with an organization. The court reporter is here to record all public comments, whether you're in the room or virtual. And just like the other one, please be respectful of other community members' concerns and input. So those are the protocol for the meeting today. Now I'd like to introduce our Caltrans panelists. They can raise their hand as we call their name. First is Javier Mendeville. He's our regional project manager and State Route 37 corridor manager. He's our quarterback tonight, the guy that's responsible for kind of the whole thing. Then we have Maxwell Lambert, acting office chief for environmental analysis, and I'm going to be handing off to him in just a couple of minutes. We have Ahmed Rahid, our senior transportation engineer for design. Diana Pink, our landscape associate. Lindsay Vivian, our office chief for biological sciences and permits. We have me, Bartney, Pedro Quintana online, and Matt O'Donnell out in the audience in the back there, Matt, are your public information officers for tonight. And with that, Max, I'll turn it over to you for meeting purpose.
Thanks, Bart. Hi, everyone. Good evening. So let's talk about now why we are here today. So Caltrans has released a draft environmental impact report and environmental assessment, or draft EIR-EA, to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act and the National Environmental Policy Act, or CEQA and NEPA, as you may hear them referred to throughout the rest of the presentation. CEQA and NEPA are the state and federal umbrella laws that cover the environmental compliance and guide agencies like Caltrans through the environmental compliance process. So these laws require us to provide an overview of the proposed project and any impacts associated with the project, as well as any mitigation measures to offset those impacts. It also requires us to accept public comments on these projects to help inform the project. So the comment period for this draft EIR-EA began on August 25th, 2023, and will end on October 8th, 2023. We'll be accepting comments until October 8th at 5 p.m. or by physical mail postmarked by that date. We also we have a physical copy of the draft EIR-EA. I think it's in the back over there, or okay, it's back over there if someone would like to review it here in person. We also have green handouts on the table that have a link to where you can find that. And then for those of you online, we'll put a link to where you can find it in the chat. Next slide, please. So let's briefly go over the agenda for today's meeting. So in a moment, I'll hand it off to Javier, who will get us started with the project history that'll kind of tell a tale about how we got to where we are today. Then we'll go into the location, purpose, and need of the project, the proposed project alternatives, the environmental analysis and significance determinations that have been made for CEQA and NEPA. And during that time, we'll also have a 360 tour of the project, and we'll give a brief overview of that and kind of guide people through that. Before concluding by reviewing the comment submission instructions, and then continuing on to our question and answer session. Now I'm going to hand it off to Javier Mendeville, our regional project manager for the State Route 37 corridor.
Thank you, Max. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. I'd like to start off with a little bit of a project history. So as Dina alluded to earlier, this project originally included an interim embankment option that would have sustained sea level rise to 2050 projected elevations. At the November 2021 scoping meeting, Caltrans received feedback indicating concern regarding the permanent impacts associated with the embankment alternative. So Caltrans went back to the drawing board to come up with additional alternatives, and these included passive flood barrier, embankments at different elevations and limits, strengthening the levees, and interim causeway. In March 2022, at the SR 37 Policy Committee meeting, Caltrans announced that it would be refining the limits to the project between US 1 and Atherton in order to address the most vulnerable section of the corridor that's most susceptible to sea level rise and flooding. A couple of months later, in summer 2022, the SR37 Planning and Environmental Linkages Study identified the existing corridor as a preferred alignment for long-term development and causeway as solution to flooding to year 2130. In December 2022, Caltrans hosted a second scoping meeting to provide the update of the ultimate causeway for year 2130 sea level rise. And then the team began drafting the draft environmental document, which has been released for public input just last month, which brings us to where we are today. Next slide, please. So this graphic shows a project vicinity. As I mentioned, it spans between US 101 and Atherton. And the purpose of the project is to incorporate resiliency on the corridor to the effect of sea level rise to year 2130 and flooding from stormwater. The need is due to recurring flooding from high tide events and heavy winter storms, which have caused delays and closures in this area. Next slide, please. This map shows, depicts the elevations of SR37 in this area and the levees through color-coded line work. SR37 is represented by that diagonal line in mostly red and orange. And as you can see from the legend, that represents the lowest elevation in that area. In this segment, the elevation of the roadway could be as low as 2 feet. And then that green and yellow line that snakes across the corridor there represents the levee system. And this levee system is what protects the surrounding area from flooding. Right there where it crosses the highway, where that number 1 is, on the bottom left-hand corner, is where the Nevada Creek is. And during heavy windstorm, during high tide events and winter storms, water ends up overtopping the levee in this area and eventually making its way to the roadway and cause flooding. Next slide, please. And that's what this looks like. So these are photos from past winter storms where we have experienced flooding along the corridor. In 2017, we experienced 28 days of flooding that caused closures on the highway. In 2019, it was 8 days. And just this year in January, we experienced 3 days of closures due to flooding on the corridor. So these photos really highlight the need for a long-term solution on this segment of the corridor, which is what this project will provide. At this point, I'd like to hand it off to my colleague in design, Ahmed Rahid, for the build.
Thank you, Peter. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for attending our meeting tonight. In the next few slides, I'm gonna go over our project alternative. 2 alternatives have been analyzed in the environmental document. The build alternative would elevate 2.5 miles of SR37 to an elevation of 35 feet with causeway.
Can you speak a little louder?
Can you hear me now? How about now? Is it okay?
We can hear you.
The volume?
Make sure this mic have to go close to your
The build alternative would elevate 2.5 miles of SR37 to an elevation of 35 feet on a causeway in 2 phases. These would accomplish the purpose and need of the project. The no build alternative would not make any changes to the existing condition, therefore not addressing the current flooding problems and projected sea level rise. Next slide, please. On the screen, you'll see the cross section of the project after its completion. Our project will have 4 12-feet lanes, 2 lanes in each direction. On each direction, there will be 10 feet of inside shoulder, which will be separated by a 2 feet wide median barrier. We'll also have 12 feet of outside shoulder. And on the south side of the bridge, we'll have 14 feet bi-directional mixed-use pedestrian and bike path. And that path will be separated from the main line with a 2 feet barrier. And on the outside edge of the bridge, we would have two outside barrier. Consisting all of it, the total width of the bridge will be 140 feet. The project will be completed in two phases, and phase one of the project will be our first construction package. Next slide, please. Phase one of the project would start at the most flood-prone area within our project limit, that is the Novato Creek Bridge. Phase one would replace the existing Novato Creek Bridge with a longer structure at an elevation of 35 feet. And there will be two transitional bridges on either side of the bridge that will connect the new bridge with the rest of the freeway. So under phase one, we will have two 12-foot lanes in each direction. The inside shoulder width will be 5 feet. The outside shoulder width will be 10 feet on each direction. And the bike path on the south side of the bridge, the width of that one will be 10 feet. So the total width of the bridge after phase one will be 96 feet. This is a simulated view looking westward. You can see the new Novato Creek Bridge and also the Western Transitional Bridge. So the length of the Western Transitional Bridge is roughly 1,153 feet. It will start at an elevation of 3.5 feet, and it will connect to the western part of the new Novato Creek Bridge at an elevation of 35 feet. Next slide, please. And here's a simulated view, phase one completion looking eastward. You can see part of the new Novato Creek Bridge and also the Eastern Transitional Bridge. The length of the Eastern Transitional Bridge roughly is 963 feet. It will connect to the eastern part of the new Novato Creek Bridge at an elevation of 35 feet. And it will conform to the existing 37 at an elevation of 3.5 feet. Next slide, please. So here's another simulated view looking westward after what it will look like after the phase two completion. The transitional bridge that we built under phase one on both directions, eastern and western, will be removed, and it will be replaced by the causeway. So under phase two, the length of phase two will be 2.5 miles long, and it will connect US 101 to Atherton Avenue. So here's a simulated view looking westward. You can see the US 101 37 connection, and there's no, you cannot see Western Transition Bridge at this picture, at this simulation, because that will be removed and it will be one connection from US 101 to the Novato Creek Bridge that we built under phase one. Next slide, please. And here's another simulated view looking eastward. You can see the Novato Creek Bridge that we built under phase one. But there's no Eastern Transitional Bridge because that part will be removed and it will be one connection from US 101 to Atherton Avenue. The completed causeway will be 2.5 miles long at an elevation of 35 feet, and it will have two 12-foot lanes in each direction, 10 feet of inside shoulder, 12 feet of outside shoulder, and a 14 feet mixed direction bike and pedestrian path, bi-directional, bike and pedestrian path on the south side of the bridge. And later on, we'll show you a 360 tour of the project with more views of how the project would look like after completion. Next slide, please. So we started our environmental phase roughly 3 years ago, and throughout this time, we looked into different alternatives. So we looked into raised embankment, interim causeway, Novato Creek Bridge replacement at acid flood barriers, Novato Creek Bridge replacement with combination of causeway and embankments, strengthened levees, State Road 37 bad at causeway, and transportation system management, transportation demand management. So I'm not gonna go into details about the description of these alternatives and our reason for rejection. I'm gonna refer you to the draft environmental document. The details for all these alternatives and our reason for rejection are mentioned over there. So at this point, I'm gonna hand it over to Max.
Thank you, Amen. Now we're going to get into the environmental review that's been conducted for the project and the impacts that we've determined to different resource areas during that review. We'll begin by covering the areas where we determined the project would have no impact. These resource areas are agriculture and forestry resources, coastal zone, growth, environmental justice, mineral resources, parks and recreation facilities, population and housing, recreation, and relocation and property acquisition. So we determined that we wouldn't have an impact on these resources for a variety of reasons, but generally it's because they were not included in the scope of the project or were not located within the project vicinity. Like the rejected alternatives, we do have more information about why we made the no impact determination for these resource areas in the draft environmental document. Next slide, please. Now let's cover the resource areas where we determined that the project would have some impact, but that it would not rise to the level of significance under CEQA. These resource areas are air quality, cultural resources, energy, geology and soils, greenhouse gas emissions, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, land use and planning, noise, public services, tribal cultural resources, utilities and service systems, and wildfire. So for these resource areas, we are proposing project features, which are measures that are applied indiscriminately on all Caltrans projects to reduce the impacts. Kind of regardless of what those impacts are, we apply those project features, as well as more specific avoidance and minimization measures to reduce those impacts. The list of those is fairly lengthy, but again, you can find that in the draft environmental document if you're interested in that. On the next couple slides, we're going to go into depth on two more of these resource areas that we think the public will be concerned about, so we want to give them special attention. Next slide, please. So the first one impact area that we wanted to talk about is to hydrology. We wanted to talk about this a little bit more because the purpose and need of the project is closely tied to the hydrology and the flooding in the area. We prepared a location hydraulic study to evaluate impacts to the floodplain for the project. And we found that as a result of the proposed project, flooding in the surrounding areas would not be changed. So the effects that is happening currently would happen to the surrounding area. So we are planning to raise State Route 37 to kind of escape that flooding. And we've elevated it to the 100-year flood elevation at projected 2130 sea level rise, which is the data we got from the Ocean Protection Council. So right now, the project area benefits from protection from the surrounding levees. We are not proposing changes to the surrounding levees as part of this project. During construction, there would be some impacts to the natural and beneficial values that the floodplain provides. But in the long term, the State Route 37 corridor would be more resilient to flooding and sea level rise. And so we expect there to be a net benefit for our facility. And you may have noticed that there are smart rail lines that run directly adjacent to the State Route 37 corridor here. You can kind of faintly see them on the backdrop of this map to the right of the highway. Caltrans is currently not proposing any changes to the smart rail lines to also address flooding, but we are coordinating with SMART to develop a project study report to further evaluate how this project or a future Caltrans project could accommodate benefits to that rail line to escape flooding. Next slide, please. The other resource area we wanted to discuss was noise. We know that noise can be a sensitive topic for folks that live adjacent to the facility or businesses that operate nearby. Good news first, we are anticipating that as a result of this project, the noise increase would be minimal. We are raising the facility, which kind of changes where the noise source is coming from. That elevated roadway profile causes the sound to travel differently to the surrounding area. We are anticipating temporary noise from construction activities. For example, pile driving is a large source of noise. But we are proposing noise reducing measures during construction. These include both noise monitoring to make sure that the noise level is staying at an appropriate level, as well as scheduling the highest intensity things like pile driving during regular business hours to avoid disruptions when you're most likely to be at home. Next slide, please. So yeah, now we're going to get into the resource areas that we determined that there would be a significant impact under CEQA, but with mitigation, we can reduce that impact to a less than significant level. These are biological resources and traffic, and we're going to get into them on the next slide. So we're going to first go into biological resources, and we're going to begin with wetlands and other waters. So the construction package 1 activities will have the following impacts to wetlands and other waters. It will have permanent impact to 0.7 acres of wetlands and open water, which consists of 0.24 acre of freshwater marsh, 0.43 acre tidal salt marsh, and 0.03 acre of open water. Temporary impacts from that same construction package would be to 5.36 acres of wetlands and other waters of the U.S. and state, which is a combination of those same habitats, but also including dike brackish marsh. Construction package 2 would have permanent impacts to 0.08 acres of tidal salt marsh and open water, temporary impacts to 5.48 acres of wetlands and other waters of the U.S. and state, which include dike brackish marsh, freshwater marsh, tidal salt marsh, and open water habitats. So we are proposing the mitigation measure Bio 1 on the screen, as well as a combination of on-site restoration, which is obviously the preferred measure, the preferred way to reduce impacts to wetlands and other waters. So there are mitigation measures, specifically compensatory mitigation, and a package of that developed in conjunction with the resource agencies. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about the endangered species that we determined could be present or would be present within the project area. And we have a few examples of these on the screen. We have the white-tailed kite, clapper rail, long-fin smelts, California red-legged frog, green sturgeon, and salt marsh harvest mouse. So there's going to be a varying range of impacts to these species, and it would probably take quite a bit of time to go into that right now. That information is in the draft environmental document for your review if you are interested in that. One area and impact to an endangered species we did want to specifically mention is impacts to California red-legged frog. We determined that that impact in particular would be significant and that we would need mitigation to reduce that to a less than significant level. On-site restoration, again, would be preferred to offset those impacts to California red-legged frog, but we would also be developing a compensatory mitigation package with input from the regulatory agencies to further offset that. Next slide. Oh, actually, there were a couple more things I wanted to mention about biological resources. So the project would have no impact on protected natural communities and special status of plant species. The project proposes no tree removal, and we anticipate that raising the SR 37 corridor would have a net benefit on wildlife movement through the corridor because you're raising the hazard to wildlife, that is the highway above where the natural environment would travel through. Now you can move on to the next slide. Thank you, Tam. The other area that we determined we would have less than significant with mitigation impact on was traffic. So during construction, we anticipate that the project would result in temporary construction delays of up to 15 minutes. We did have a proposed detour route for the project. That's shown in purple on the screen here. We start on the east side up at the Harbor Drive exit before continuing on to Atherton Avenue, connecting to US 101 in the north, and then traveling down south on US 101 back to 37. So this detour would be proposed in conjunction with a regional strategy to alert the traveling public to any use of this detour or any proposed lane closures. We'd be using our changeable message signs to alert the traveling public of that detour. So hopefully those measures would encourage people to use alternate routes instead of the detour. We're hoping that we'll keep that to a minimum. Our mitigation measure that we proposed is a traffic analysis that will be proposed closer to phase 2 construction. Right now, the traffic analysis that we have can't accurately project out to the anticipated construction year of phase 2. So we will have that mitigation measure in place to make sure that any additional recommendations from that traffic analysis are incorporated into our traffic management plan for phase 2. We would also have delays and interruptions to service for pedestrians and cyclists throughout the 37 corridor in the project vicinity during construction. Next slide. All right, so we have visual and aesthetic resources here. This is the one area that we determined would have a significant impact under CEQA, and we would not be able to mitigate that to less than significant level. Next slide. So on this slide, we have a simulated view of the existing conditions as well as the phase 1 project completion. So the viewpoint that we're using here is from the Belmarine Keys from Montego Park facing north. And as you can see, the new elevated roadway facility over the Nevada Creek would be a fairly substantial view change for this vicinity. Next slide. Here's the same viewpoint, but this is after phase 2 construction. So you can see the remainder of the causeway and highway has been elevated to that 35-foot height. This is, again, another substantial change to the viewshed. We are proposing several avoidance and minimization measures for visual resources to reduce impacts. These measures include restoring any areas disturbed by construction to pre-construction conditions as feasible. Any new slopes associated with the project would be graded to mimic natural contours. We would limit construction lighting during construction to be focused on the areas needed for construction and not allow spillover to adjacent properties or habitat. We would screen the construction area as feasible from the traveling public's view. And when we would design the structures, we would have the project components designed in a way to minimize visual contrast. Unfortunately, these avoidance and minimization measures would not reduce the impacts to a less than significant level. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to hand it off to Diana Pink from our landscape architecture office, and she's going to give us a 360 tour of the project.
Thank you, Max. Good evening, everyone. As you may have seen, hopefully utilizing the QR code in the mailer or the QR code that's posted on some of the display boards here tonight, we have developed a 3D simulation of the project known as the 360 tour. After opening the link, you will arrive at the project location here on State Route 37. Once there, you can click and drag with the mouse or pan with your finger on a smartphone or tablet. You're also able to zoom in and out in particular areas. You'll see 3 orange targets along the roadway, which can be selected and will take you to that particular location. Once you arrive at that location, you'll see the conditions as they exist today. And you'll also see 2 orange circles that can be selected that will show you the proposed project after the completion of that particular phase. The arrow icon will take you back to the main page where you can find a link to the State Route 37 corridor website and find the draft environmental document and additional information about the corridor. So we encourage you to please check out the 360 tour and explore, get more information. And now back to Matt to discuss the project schedule.
Thank you, Diana. And so for those of you here in person, there's a QR code in the back that you could scan to take you to that website that Diana was running us through. Now we're going to briefly go over the schedule for the project. We have the draft environmental document, which was circulated, which is August 25th, 2023. We are here today on the 21st night of September at the public meeting. We will complete the environmental phase for the project in December of 2023, and we'll be certifying our final EIR EA by that date. We'll complete design for phase 1. We're anticipating to do that for the Nevada Creek Bridge replacement by spring of 2026, and then beginning construction on that same phase spring of 2027. So then design and construction of phase 2 right now is subject to funding availability. We are working very closely with our stakeholders and partners in the region to identify funding, and we're aggressively pursuing grants to obtain additional funding to fund that phase. Next slide, please. All right, so here are a few ways that you can submit comments on the project, and we just want to say that your comments are very important to us. They help inform our projects and mold them, and it's how we better serve you. So our public comment period ends October 8th, 2023 at 5 p.m. or if you submit by postal mail, postmarked by that date. You can submit comments if you're here in person on a physical comment card. Those are located over with Jasmine at the front desk. You can also submit comments via email at sr37floodproject@dot.ca.gov, or you can submit via postal mail to Caltrans District 4, Chenchen Schuyler Nguyen, P.O. Box 23660, Mail Station 8B, Oakland, California 94623. And we'll be addressing comments in the final EIR EA. And so now, thank you. That concludes our presentation.